Nocn vLearn launches to all Nocn Group centres for programmes, qualifications and bespoke accreditation. vLearn is a custom-branded, easy-to-use virtual learning environment to empower your tutors and learners by utilising the most cutting-edge technology, including a learning management system, digital content, artificial intelligence and chatbots. The following topics will be the first to launch: tutor support for qualifications and bespoke accreditation, assessment materials and mock examination content, hundreds of ready-to-go digital learning courses. vLearn provides all of the features you need in one place. All of this for only £20 per month per centre, learner fee for only £2 per learner per month. Contact your Nocn Group account manager at business-inquiries@nocn.org.uk to become a part of the vLearn experience. Nocn vLearn.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning. I trust that you can see me, and any minute now you'll be able to see my first slide. Fantastic. So morning to you on what is a fairly bright but still a bit overcast morning in southeast London for me. Whereabouts are you? You can let me know in your questions box. We can use that for questions, but also for generally comments and just a bit of banter at the start of this webcast. Our fourth instalment, more on that in a moment. So great to have so many of you tuning in again, many hundreds already tuning in. I can see the numbers rising steadily still. So we just use these first few minutes to make sure that you are all in the system and that you can see me, hear me, and perhaps most importantly as well, using the questions box to be able to communicate with me. So morning to Darren, morning Yvonne in Somerset, Lisa in Essex, James in Northampton, morning Lindsay. I'm not going to read them all out now because they're coming through thick and fast from Colin, Bev, Jackie, Carolyn. We've got Leeds here, Manchester, sunny York, and sunny Blackpool up there in the north. Leicester, Shooters Hill. Is that Shooters Hill just around the corner from me? Sunny Devon, all around the country. Anyone further away than Blackpool? I think that's a bit further than Devon, but my geography isn't great being a Londoner. Anything north of Watford Gap, I'm in trouble. Fantastic to have so many of you, and great that you've all found the questions box. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the this webcast technology we're using this morning, and perhaps have been on several of these already. Perhaps this is your 4th week in a row. Who is joining us for the 4th time and has so far collected all the stamps in week 1, which was the summary week. Then we did chapter 1, chapter 2, and we'll be focusing today, as you can see from this slide, on chapter 3. Well done, Tracy, the first one to come in to say that this is the 4th week in a row. Fantastic to have you back. Good, so we're just coming to about 35 past 10 now, which should be enough time to have made sure that enough people have been able to get into the system. But most important thing, although they may not hear it if they've not tuned in yet, is of course this is being recorded, and we will be sharing the link to the recording for this webcast shortly after, and be posting it on a web page on the FE Week website. We've done that already for the first 3 webcasts, so if you have missed any of the preceding weeks, do not fear, you can go back. You think, oh, I didn't really read very much about chapter 1. Nick's about to tell me, as I am, how important chapter 1 in particular is, even though today's about chapter 3. So you might want to go back and watch chapter 1, so you'll be able to do that. Equally, and the same for today as well, you can watch it back or send it round to friends, families, pets, colleagues, and so on, if you wish. So, same goes for the slides, because the running order is going to be the same as it has been in the previous 3 weeks. I'm going to spend about 40 minutes doing a bit of a kind of an overview, not too much death by PowerPoint, but that's the kind of gist of things. So just from me, a bit of an overview for chapter 3. Then delighted to have back Graham Hastings-Evans. Graham is of course Chief Executive at Nocn Group and our partner for this webcast series about the FE white paper. And then our VVIPs, our very, very important people for this week, our select few. We've tried to be very selective about who we have for each of the relevant chapters. We have, of course, the new president for the Association of Colleges, but also Chief Executive for the large college group Activate Learning. We have Sally Dicketts, CBE. Alongside Sally will be Dr. Susan Pember, CBE, who you'll be very familiar with, I'm sure, both as a policy director at HOLEX and before that, a very senior civil servant within the Department for Education, overseeing further education skills. And then, of course, Simon Ashworth, who is the Chief Policy Officer for the Association of Employment and Learning Providers. So there are select 3 that we'll be hearing from in conversation shortly after the opening remarks from Graham Hastings-Evans, but I'm going to go first. So that's what I'm going to do now. As I've mentioned already, this has been recorded. You'll get that recording. The slides you'll get sent as well, so don't feel the need to write that down. And just to repeat, I'm now going to do a summary, but you do have a little questions box, which I'll probably turn to once we get into conversation. So have a good think about the things that I'm saying, the things you've already read, because of course this white paper has been out for a couple of months now, and then get ready to ping in your questions or comments, and we'll see if we can involve you in the conversation with Sally, Sue, and Simon as well. So if it's all right with you, I'm going to have a slurp of my coffee and then get going. Okay, so the first couple of slides are just a reminder, a bit of a scene setter for the white paper. from me. And this slide is a bit of tongue-in-cheek, but you know how much I like my numbers. So here is the white paper in numbers, perhaps not in the numbers that you'd like it to be in, involving pounds and pence, but nevertheless, here are some numbers for you, just to try and get across. I guess the key message with this slide is just how wide-ranging this white paper is. And this is why we felt it was appropriate to do a bit of a series across 6 weeks, covering first, as we did, the sort of executive summary with Keith Smith, one of the key architects or authors in terms of being a civil servant, leading on the post-16 skills in this particular white paper. If you're familiar with Keith Smith, perhaps more so with his work on the apprenticeship reform program for many years, and then he moved out of the ESFA about a year ago into the department to work on this white paper and implementation going forward. So we heard from Keith a few weeks ago, then we did chapter 1 2 weeks ago, chapter 2 last week, and we're going to cover chapter 3 now. So a very wide-ranging document, and I think a lot of people have described this document as a not unhelpful way of certainly pulling together all of the reform strands that are going on at the moment, involving the certainly post-16 further education skills, particularly around the adult side at the higher levels, as we'll be talking about, levels 3, but particularly level 4 and 5, which will be quite a focus for this morning. Pulling all that together into one document is quite helpful. Cross-departmental, which is absolutely key with the white paper. And as I'll come on and mention as well, the significance of it being a white paper in terms of legislation. So very, very wide-ranging. Now, this isn't so important for the chapter that we're covering this morning, but again, I want to use this slide because for me, this is the primary reason why we have a white paper. I think this is a new attempt from government to try something that they've tried many times before, which is to bring together the economy in the form of employers and the education sector in the form of particularly colleges. Certainly not only colleges, but that's definitely where a lot of the focus is with this particular white paper. And many of the reforms and the capital funding and so on is very much being focused on colleges, but we'll be hearing from certainly about colleges, I'm sure, from Sally Dicketts, but we've got Susan Pember representing in many ways the more local authority and the specialist designated institutions in the form of adult education, and then of course the independent training providers with Simon Ashworth. So we've got the full range to a great extent, or certainly a large range of provider interests that we'll be talking to later. But for me, the white paper is very much about the ongoing battle that the government feel they have in terms of employers investing or not in their workforce and using the college sector in particular, or not, as the case may be, in terms of training staff going into the workforce or staff once they are in the workforce. So this white paper is quite unique, as all white papers are, because they come before typically primary legislation. So although the white paper almost seems to go out of its way to try and avoid too much mentioning of the legislation, or particularly how the legislation will play out, and that will be subject to a lot of not just drafting of various bills, but debating them in both houses, and we'll see how they play out in due course. But we are expecting there to be an FE bill, or whatever they decide to call the bill. We'll probably just call it an FE bill, as we've called this one the FE white paper. And for me, as I've been saying on several of these webcasts already, for me, the standout purpose of this white paper, amongst all the other reasons for doing it and talking about existing, ongoing or future reforms, it's about compliance. It's about saying, okay, we've cajoled, we've incentivized, we've introduced new programs, we've allowed employers to design things, but it's still not, we're still not there in terms of the government thing, in terms of particularly colleges delivering the courses that the government believes are needed for the local economies. So what they're going to do is they're going to introduce legislation to enforce local skills plans. So if the college does not follow the skills plan, as described by Keith Smith, quite frankly, 3 weeks ago, if the college is not, the college will need to sign up to this local skills plan to receive their funding, and then obviously if they're not following the skills plan, whatever that means in practical terms, we'll find out in due course, then that would be subject to intervention from the relevant Secretary of State, currently Gavin Williamson. So that we're kind of moving in, for me in many ways, into a new phase of potentially compliance around not just you can have this money if you do these things, but if you don't do these things, then there will be a form of intervention to ensure that you do them, not that you just go bust, because of course colleges are very important local community assets. So that will be an interesting one to watch. Government quite nervous at the moment about talking about this because we've not yet seen what the potential bill might look like. I understand there's quite a lot of wrangling within the department and within government about exactly what this intervention might look like. And bear in mind, number 10 have shown a very significant interest in this. They have Professor Alison Wolfe working 3 days a week and has been there for about a year now, beavering away 3 days a week within the number 10 policy unit. So you've got that going on, and then you influencing the department. And then of course the Treasury have a very influential role, not just in terms of the money that is required, but actually very influential in terms of what they think policies will work and what they want implemented, particularly right now with coronavirus. A lot of investment taking place right now is being geared towards supporting that recovery, not necessarily the much longer term reform plans that have been envisaged. So interested perhaps in hearing from our panelists later if they agree with me that this is the primary purpose of the white paper. It's certainly, the more I read it, the more I talk to people like Keith Smith, who authors behind it, it really is a standout for me. And we've been reporting for over a year now at FE Week about the government's kind of moving this on to intervening where they feel that the courses are being delivered at the wrong level or in the wrong sectors, not just in terms of the qualifications they'll fund, but actually as part of an intervention process. So definitely one to watch, as well as which employers they're really talking about. Are the chambers of commerce, something we talked about a lot at the last webcast, are the chambers of commerce in all parts of the country really geared up to play a significant and influential role in the further education skills system? But let's move on specifically to talk about chapter 3, because that's the primary focus of this morning. So we've already covered for me, the main chapter, chapter 1, about putting the employers at the heart of the system, and with that new legislation. We talked last week about the reforms to advanced technical and higher technical skills at length, and that covered things like the apprenticeship reforms. It covered things like T-levels. Much of that covered areas that we're kind of familiar with in terms of ongoing reform programs. But we move into a new area now with chapter 3, which we'd not really heard about in terms of some of this language until last October. So last October, perhaps coming sooner than I suspect sooner than the department was ready for. I think my reading of it was that Boris Johnson last October was very keen to show the government was taking action. It was a certain point in the coronavirus crisis where I think it suited the government to show that they had these plans in place as part of a recovery. So he travelled to Exeter College and gave a speech in which he launched something we'd never heard of before, called or at least he launched the idea of, if not the actual programme itself, the Lifetime Skills Guarantee. And this very much fed off some of the commitments into the manifesto. Much of this is feeding from the manifesto. If you look at the new money involved, there is significant new money involved, although it's quite targeted. Very much this Lifetime Skills Guarantee focusing around kind of reforming and building on the previous entitlements that have been introduced in further education and skills over the last decade. So we're going to be covering this chapter this morning, and then we've got 2 more weeks left to cover chapters 4 and 5, and we're actually very hopeful, perhaps as part of chapter 5 or a subsequent webcast, we're quite hopeful as well that we may indeed be joined by Professor Alison Wolfe as well, the other key architect in a sense. We've got Keith Smith at the department, and then Professor Alison Wolfe, as I've already mentioned, at number 10. So hopeful to hear from her over the next few weeks as well. So let's have a look at chapter 3. So here is chapter 3. As is the case with all the chapters, you get a kind of summary section at the beginning of the chapter that we'll look at briefly. And then in this case, we have, 6 sort of subheadings within the chapter that we'll briefly look at in turn before the opening remarks from Graham Hastings-Evans at Nocn Group, our partner for these webcasts, and then going to our roundtable. So let's have a look at this lifetime skills guarantee. And for this particular chapter, I'm mainly just going to pull out particular paragraphs so you can read them as sections from the white paper as they've written. I'm sure you've read much of this already, but I'll obviously put my own take on them to some extent. But as I say, this is just really an opportunity to summarize what's in the chapter before we then talk a bit more about it, or potentially go a bit off piece later in the, if we so choose, in the roundtable. So some of this new language you've got to start getting your head around. So there's going to be a lifetime skills guarantee, and then part of the lifetime skills guarantee, there'll be a lifelong loan entitlement. So again, just watch the language here, terminology. We know in further education skills that's something to really keep an eye on. So much of this will be funded through the National Skills Fund, which is a new pot of money we talked quite a lot about last week. And this will provide individuals with a loan entitlement to the equivalent of 4 years worth of post-18 education to use over their lifetime. So this is quite a significant entitlement at one level, looking at this. At another level, you could say, well, we already have advanced learner loans. You can already do qualifications at level 4 and 5 through advanced learner loans. I think to some extent there's a degree of spin going on here around the word entitlements, where they are loans. You are going to have to pay this money back. But let's read on. So the loan entitlement will be usable for modules at higher technical and degree levels, regardless of whether they are provided in college or universities, as well as for full years of study. So what we're going to come on and talk about, and you'll see really, is this isn't, for me, this is much of this is about branding and packaging, because we've really seen a demise at level 4 and 5, a lot of confusion. And this is very much about the government trying to finally tackle something that was probably a huge headache for Susan Pember when she was in the department, and we're hearing from her later, which is this kind of, you might argue it's artificial, but I think operationally it's very real divide between further education and higher education when it comes to funding. So, you know, the Education Skills Funding Agency on one side administering with the Student Loans Company the advanced learner loans, and then you've got, now it was HEFCE, but you've now got OFS funding the higher education elements, going through the again within the department with their own ministers. So looking at trying to kind of bring those together, as we'll come on and see in this chapter, focusing very much on some of the neglected levels, all that kind of that part between, typically between further education and AHE, so in between level 3 and degree, that level 4 and 5 in particular, which we've seen a very significant decline in numbers over the last decade. Courses like foundation degrees, HNDs, HNCs have really been left to languish by not just the previous Conservative government coalition, but arguably the Labour Party before them. So moving into the subheaders, delivery of high quality provision. So we'll just work through these in order for the next 10 minutes or so. So what's this saying? We will work towards a well integrated and aligned higher education and further education system with the flexibility that enables students to move between settings to suit their needs. Gosh, who would argue against that? That does sound rather wonderful, and certainly not what we have at the moment. Very difficult to get your head around doing a qualification in one setting and then being able to continue it and finishing it in another setting. So here we see the idea of incentivizing easier and more frequent credit transfer between institutions. So this has started to, for those of you that have got not that long memories, you may remember we had a qualifications and credit framework that was introduced about 10 years ago and lasted about 5 years. That was more at the lower level, certainly level 2 and level 3. This to me looks like a version of that, kind of straddling the further education and higher education system and sector. So therefore the sort of higher levels 4 and 5 in particular, where you have these modularized courses that you can accumulate credit, and then that credit is you can kind of bank it and then build on it else at other institutions. So certainly, having worked in this sector for nearly 20 years now, this is a very ambitious thing to attempt to do, I would suggest. I'm not sure many would argue against it though. So for the lifelong loan entitlement to be a success, it's crucial that the user is at the heart of these reforms, creating a more efficient and user-friendly system, which will require significant changes to student loans company systems. Now, this is going to be interesting because my understanding is the student loans company has been pretty reticent to have a major overhaul of their systems. It was a struggle, I understand, to get advanced loaner loans administered by them to some extent. We've not had maintenance loans in further education, and the rumor I've heard is that's partly because, again, of reticence from the student loans company to manage that. They've struggled, I understand, behind the scenes to just manage what they're already responsible for. So I could see a very significant, probably capital investment will be needed for the IT systems to cope in this space. And many of you may have been talking about or heard about ideas perhaps that you were hoping for to be announced as part of this white paper around learner accounts, or we have various names for these things, that are kind of reinventions of perhaps a past system of individualized learner accounts. This to me looks a little bit like this, but not focused at below, certainly at level 3 and below, I would suggest. This looks to me very much focused around a new system for adults to accumulate these higher level credits. Will there be an IT system to support that they log in, that they can see, that they can, we've heard this before many times about systems where employers could go and have a little look. We already have personal learner records in further education, but that's really only used by the education institutions themselves. We don't tend to have learners tapping into them or employers having a look. So a lot of unknowns in this space, and it certainly doesn't look like the department have managed to agree with the Treasury yet a very significant capital investment for the IT infrastructure. If you consider that the apprenticeship online system, just to get it to a minimum viable service back in 2017, we understand cost about 12 to 15 million pounds, just back then to get it to that minimum viable service. So you can see the sorts of monies that might be needed if this was going to be an all singing, all dancing, user-friendly system as it's described here. And we may have to wait, department may have to wait for a 3-year spending review to get some real money behind this, which might explain why some of these reforms have quite a long kind of calendar of activity needed before being fully rolled out. So as I say, no sign yet of any sort of IT budget for this potentially learner account system at level 4 and above. Waiting to hear. We do ask the department infrequently where they're at with certain things they've committed to doing, but we've certainly not heard of any major moves yet to facilitate a significant change at the student loans company that this would require. So they do want to consult on the changes, which is good. I'm sure you'd agree. I'd be keen to have a look at this sooner rather than later, but we are expecting it to come pretty soon, because it does say here that in early 2021, and I suggest that we are definitely just about still in early 2021, but I think once we get into April, and we're starting to head into the middle, I would suggest, of 2021. So anytime now, perhaps, there will be a consultation around this loan entitlement, maybe the first of several. If you recall, with apprenticeship reforms, we had at least 3 formal consultations before it was implemented in 2017. So interested to see whether the first consultation is quite high level and where it takes us from there. No doubt most people, certainly the media in the main, will no doubt focus on the fee levels rather than the actual reforms as far as the curriculum and the portability of credits and so on are concerned. But certainly FE Week will be very focused on the role of the further education skills sector. And there is an expectation that this is a huge opportunity in a market which is absolutely dominated by higher education institutions. So this is expected to be quite revolutionary for further education, I think it's fair to say, although we don't have much more detail than I'm presenting to you from the white paper at the moment. The government have talked up for a while, for example, many more options for people to do 1- and 2-year style degrees, not be locked into the full-time 3-year degrees in quite the way they are, certainly in England at the moment. So we may well see higher level qualifications of the sort of HND foundation degree ilk that are both part-time and full-time, but are shorter in their time frame. So they'll seek views on objectives and coverage, together with aspects such as the modularity, which is the minimum number of credits of a course, and how to incentivize. I do like the word incentivize. See whether that incentive comes with a money attached, or it's another form of incentive, and enable effective credit transfer, and whether equivalent and lower qualifications, the ELQs, restrictions should be amended to facilitate retraining and stimulate provision. These ELQs were introduced about, I think, about a decade ago. It's they were quite controversial, had very significant impact at the time, certainly on institutions like the Open University, because what they basically said was that if you've already got a degree, then you couldn't take out a loan to do a second one, even in a new subject. So they're looking at that, and certainly we've seen in further education quite a move away from ELQ type policies. If you look at, for example, apprenticeships, if you recall, before May 2017, if you had a degree, you couldn't do an apprenticeship. Nobody with a degree could do any apprenticeship at any level. But as of May 2017, anyone with a degree or a master's or even a doctorate can now do an apprenticeship, even at level 2, as long as there isn't duplication of content, or at least not significant enough duplication. So perhaps we may well have a resurgence of the part-time higher education courses that have really taken a hit since the ELQ restrictions were in place, and this would be arguably a real opportunity for the further education sector if they chose to, if colleges and training providers chose to enter this market. Some do to some extent already, but it's definitely been a significant decline in the last decade, and a great big part of that reason isn't just about funding, but it's been about this particular and controversial policy to do with where learners have already reached a level, a qualification level, and are therefore not able to take out a loan at that level, equivalent level. As I say, the focus is very much here at level 4 and 5. I'm sure some of our panelists coming up, and Graham as well, will be keen to point out that there are other lower levels that are very important to get people to these higher levels. But there is no question that this white paper is focused on the higher levels, the higher technical levels, particularly level 4 and 5, that we've seen this decline. When we challenged Keith Smith on the lack of new funding and new programs at levels 2 and below in particular, his argument was that, well, there's already funding for that. That's taking place already, and this is new programs and new stimulation ways to stimulate the higher end of the market when it comes to qualification levels. So it was put up quite a strong defence at the lower levels, saying, well, that market, that funding is already in place through things like the adult education budget. So short-term progress. So what they're saying is that this lifelong loan entitlement won't be introduced until 2025, which feels quite a long way away, although I'm sure that the clock will move very fast for the Department for Education over the next few years, with so many things going on, so many plates they're spinning and balls that they're juggling. So they want to hear, particularly at the moment, from institutions that, and this is where colleges really are key. It's typically colleges, not exclusively, there are independent training providers, but mainly colleges, I think, that have significant funds coming through the advanced learner loans and coming through the OFS's higher education funding as well. So they're sort of got 2 HE style fundings coming in from 2 different places. So we need to talk about I suspect the department wants to better understand the challenges there and how to better facilitate alignment, as they describe it. They are going to look at the fee limits for different qualifications naturally, and that's, I'm sure, where as I say, the media will focus their attention in terms of that 9,000 cap. They intend to fund trials of modular technical provision. I don't know if you spotted it, but there was this paragraph in the budget, not the one we've just had, but the one last November. There was this paragraph about how they were going to spend some of this new National Skills Fund from next month, so the financial year starting April, and they've set aside 110 million of the National Skills Fund including 50 million capital investment, which is very, I mean, this is a slightly technical, but very weird and unusual. We did ask them about this as to why they've used the National Skills Fund for capital money. That's not normal, and my guess is they probably had to get Treasury permission, because this is meant to be grant funding, not capital funding. But anyway, so they are going to, they've set aside 50 million of capital investment over the next to spend in the next 12 months to support the future rollout of this entitlement, to try out and test and pilot and develop innovative models for local collaboration between skills providers and employers. So again, this will be where the incentives concept comes in. Anytime now, I'm sure we may get a tender about this. We'll get more information, because they'll need to start spending this. They've only got 12 months to spend this 110 million from next month, unless the Treasury allow them to move money around, which is very rare. So we've heard nothing from the DfE yet. We've asked them this week where they're at. Haven't heard back. We'll get an in due course, no doubt. But any minute now, you should expect a flurry of activity from the Department for Education, because I suspect they're already getting a bit nervous that the clock is ticking on this 110 million. So no doubt there'll be kind of, my guess is sort of mini versions of the institutes of technology of kind of corralling the further and higher education sector to work together with employers in return for testing and developing these models and the funding that would sit behind them, especially the capital investment is always very attractive, particularly to the colleges, tend to be the ones that it's only available to. A lot of colleges have done very well in the last year with the first round of capital investment, and have been spending that in the last 12 months, and there'll be more to come. This is fairly straightforward. There's not a lot to say here. There's a bit of a random small subchapter I feel was kind of crowbarred in because of COVID to sort of say, yeah, and we'll build on the kind of what the lessons learned and make sure that we're being very flexible around digital online delivery. The ESFA in particular, Funding Edge in particular, has always taken a bit of a beating that their funding policies have not really incentivized online learning. But I have sympathy with them, because it's public money. It must be in England only. You must be able to show equivalent cost in terms of delivery, and face-to-face tends to be the easiest way to do that with classrooms and so on. So innovative delivery models don't always fit very well with a kind of fairly rigid funding and assurance regime. Then there's this interesting section about kind of, again, a bit crowbarred into this chapter about careers advice. They probably thought, well, where else can we put something? Someone's going to ask about careers advice, so we need to put it somewhere in here. And it boils down to them, interestingly, the government admitting that something that the likes of Robert Halfon has been very much banging a drum about for the last 3 years, I would say, Robert Halfon, ever since he left the role as skills minister. Admitting here that the careers landscape, this is the government themselves admitting that it's confusing, fragmented and unclear, which is quite interesting given how much money they've been throwing, have been throwing a lot of money at careers advice through new institutions like the Careers and Enterprise Company. So interesting one to watch, maybe if careers advice is of interest to you. We've had the Baker Clause and so on in terms of some legislative changes, but really I think there's a rethink going on here about the role of the Careers and Enterprise Company in the context of where they sit alongside the kind of adult version, which is more online in the case of the National Careers Service, and how to, again, that kind of alignment idea. There's a lot of duplication across our sector in the agencies and so on, so an opportunity to revisit that. And then I've just decided to copy and paste in full here the 2 sentences, 2 paragraphs about improving the actual advice itself. Nothing that we didn't already know here, extending what we've already got. This very much is a significant part of the school sixth form and some college market, but we have a new chief executive at the Careers and Enterprise Company, and I think all eyes will be on them because of the well over 100 million that's been spent with them in the last few years to really see return on that investment. Finally, just a little kind of key dates I always include, so you can have a little read of that as I now introduce Graham Haston Evans, who is, of course, I say, the Chief Executive for Nocn Group. I'm very delighted that Nocn Group is our partner for these webcasts, and he will be joining us now to give us his opening remarks with regard to the white paper, but specifically, of course, some of the things I've been talking about and this particular chapter. Graham, hopefully that was a useful little summary, and I'm now going to hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nick. Good morning, everybody. As Nick has said, we're talking about Chapter 3, Flexible Lifetime Skills Guarantee, and underneath that, the entitlement. I think if you attended last week's session, and perhaps some of you will have, you will recall I said that there seems to be, agree that there's a rationale to the view that our economy is going to be, in order to be more productive and successful and level up people, you're going to be increasingly in a digital world focused on high-end services and sectors and STEM, and we need the workforce to do that. So I think there's a real opportunity in the white paper if we can turn it into a reality. And so the principle is welcomed and what we're trying to do. I think level 4 and level 5 is an essential gap to fill. There's a big gap in the workforce there, and so that all makes sense. But we need sensible funding rates to do that. And I don't think it is, as Nick has mentioned, just about let's have a look at level 4 and level 5. It's how we progressively lift the skills of the workforce in its entirety. And that means lifting the 4.8 million people in the workforce that have either no qualification or only a level 2 qualification, to get those up to level 2, and then from level 2 to level 3, and level 3 to 4 and 5, and so on. We need to provide pathways for people to move also from one sector to another, and to provide support for training in colleges, ITPs, and within employers if we're going to actually make the changes that we're talking about. I reference a report that was published in September 2019. Patrick Craven of Sitting Gills and myself published a report called Close the Gap. And in that, we set out the evidence for over the next 4 years, upskilling 1 million people who only have a level 1 or no qualification up to level 2, then upskilling 1.4 million from level 2 to level 3, and then 1.6 million from level 3 to level 4 and 5 to help fill that gap. Total about 4 million to be upskilled over the next 3 to 4 years. It's on our website, so you can have a look at it. In setting this out, we recognise that that by the middle of this decade, we would still need 9.8 million people in the workforce with level 2 and below skills. Remember, this is the workforce that builds our homes, provides us with tap water, takes the waste away, provides our roads, our railways and power stations, cleans our environment, and takes away and recycles our rubbish. They provide and run the very fabric of our society and our culture. They're crucial. They are the backbone of the workforce, and we need a white paper that covers them as well as level 4 and level 5. Last week, we were talking about the proposals to increase the numbers of people at level 4 and level 5 over the next decade. The estimate is if we're going to try and hit the lower end 20% level that the government talks about, there's 2.4 million people to upskill. So these are really very ambitious figures. The Lifetime Skills Guarantee was first proposed, as you know, in the context of the PM's announcement about giving everybody their first level 3, or as many people that wanted it. And in white paper, they've made that clear that within that Lifetime Skills Guarantee, there's a specific loan entitlement for levels 4 and 5. However, I do worry about the timescales. We talk about 2025. We're all realists. In that time, we might have a change in government and probably a couple of different skills ministers. So you start to worry about a guarantee in those sorts of timescales. A lot can happen in the next 4 or 5 years. As Nick has said, the support is in the form of the lifetime loan entitlement, equivalent to 4 years worth of post-18 education, and for level 4 and level 5. One of my concerns in all of this, and I hear what Keith is saying, that there's all these other pots all over the place, is that we're just not having a whole coherent funding regime that takes the level 1s up to the level 2s and so on. And I do worry that that's not really going to happen. And I'm also concerned at the number of people that take up loans and they're willing to actually do that, what appetite there is for loans. If we look at the late 1990s when Access came in, they've got a loan entitlement type of scheme, but there's only 19,000 people a year take out that loan. If we look at advanced learner loans, level 3 and 4, in 2016-17, there was 119,000. That dropped in 1920 to 95,800. So I think there's some real questions here. The appetite for loans is in the tens of thousands, but the ambitions in terms of upskilling is in the millions. So there's quite a big mismatch there. So as I mentioned before, we're in the position we're in because individuals and employers have to date not seen the value in raising the number of people up the skills ladder to get them up to level 3 and then level 4 and 5. So winning acceptance to the individuals and to their employers is crucial. In that respect, the offering's got to be right for the individual and the employer and clearly consistent with all or a substantial part of the industry approved occupational standards. We've got to get people to have the right skills for the right jobs. And therefore, I accept that the entitlements and the qualifications have got to be employer-led. But so far, the level 3 qualifications that come under the guarantee have been determined by the department, and we haven't had a lot of employer involvement in that process. Perhaps that's going to change as we move forward, and that was done as a sort of quick fix. So just quickly in summary, I think I'd like some more clarity. I do welcome what's here. I think there are real opportunities, so I'm pleased about that. But I would like to see 3 modifications in the white paper. I'd like to see a single lifetime loan entitlement, extending level 2 up to level 5, so that we've got a real ladder to help level up the 48 million people in the workforce that have no qualification or level 1 and move those up. I'd like to see an increase in the funding for AEB over the next 3 or 4 years, maybe to try and double it, again, to support this movement up the ladder. And I think crucially, I think all areas of England have to have the same powers and access to per capita funding as is enjoyed by the combined authorities. So those are my 3 agenda points for changing the white paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you for your opening remarks. I'm now going to invite Sally Dicketts, the president for the Association of Colleges and Chief Executive at Activate Learning, to join us, along with Dr. Susan Pember, the Director of Policy at HOLEX, former Director of Further Education and Skills and Finance at the department. Hi, Sue, and then of course Simon Ashworth from, where are you from, Simon? I'm not clear from your, oh yeah, Association of Employment and Learning Providers. Is joining us as well. So that's great. I'll start with Sally, if that's okay. Welcome this morning to the webcast on Chapter 3. This is just an opportunity, just 3 or 4 minutes from you, if that's okay, just some opening remarks. It can be anything about the white paper, not just on Chapter 3. Great to have you with us.
Thanks very much, Nick. I mean, in the main, what isn't to like in the white paper? It isn't the white paper. It sounds marvellous. You know, FE and skills are at the centre of the universe going forward, and the concept of a flexible life skills guarantee, again, is a fantastic thing. I would agree that from level 2 onwards would be much better. I have no problem with employers being at the heart, working with us, not dictating to us. I think the whole issue of upskilling the workforce, probably not just teachers again, is fantastic. However, it requires funds to do it. And I think what we should do is work out how much will it cost to actually deliver the white paper, and then negotiate with government to say, well, if you haven't got those funds, we understand it, let's dial back and let's change things. I think there are issues in the white paper which again sound really neat, and you've raised some of them, Nick. I mean, I used to be a long time ago in ILIA a head of careers, and having done careers, just doing some of the things that they are talking about under the National Careers Service website, from my experience of having both taught and advised, won't work. And if we're talking about technology changing all the jobs, it's going to cost a fortune to keep it up to date, because we're going to have an entirely different set of jobs. I could bore for Britain on how adults learn, and the idea that remote learning for some adults is going to be the answer, because if you're a fearful, failed learner, it won't work. And I think, unfortunately, policy in the main is determined by very academic, very able, successful learners. And I am a very failed learner in many senses. And I'm always intrigued when I deal with the department that haven't got a clue about what it's like to be a failed learner and learning. I'll stop there because, as I say, I could use up the whole 40 minutes on just how I would change our learning system. In the main, it's like all policy, the devil's in the detail, and unfortunately, I don't think the department knows the detail.
Thank you, Sally. Yes, that's really useful little summary. And we'll definitely come back to the careers aspect, because although it's not an area that I'm that familiar with myself, I know that it has been there's been a lot of head banging over the last decade, and Dr. Sue may want to say a few things in terms of 20 years ago, how much head banging might have been going on back then in the department as well. But before we do that, Sue, we'll come to you now, if that's okay. Just an opportunity again to give your opening remarks. Welcome.
Yeah, hi everybody. Yeah, the white paper, for me, on reflection, the best thing is the title, because it talks about it being lifelong and it's for everyone. The content of the paper is fine, but it's only half or a third of a story. And I think Graham explained very clearly, if we want to make this country more productive, we really need to work with the 17 million people who haven't got a level 2, so that they got something to progress to. And then in the white paper, it talks about great stuff, well, except I'm not sure a loan entitlement. An entitlement to a loan is great stuff. Entitlement to a grant is brilliant. Entitlement to maintenance is wonderful. Entitlement to a loan, which they've already got, I'm not quite sure about. However, it has put, upskilling on the agenda. It has talked about level 4 and 5. It does talk about level 3. It does talk about, more investment. And the overall white paper does talk about simplification. But the problem we've got a white paper on one hand, and then on the other hand, the world is moving on, and it's not very simple. We've got, I don't know how many bidding opportunities there are at the moment, just too many. We're not mainstreaming, we're making it really difficult for providers. And yesterday's announcement about a tolerance of 90% just makes it really hard and feels a bit spiteful. So on one hand, we've got a white paper, but reality is so much different. I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, we'll definitely be coming back to you on a number of those points. And obviously, you're representing the in terms of HOLEX anyway, you're representing the adult education sector. Primarily, I think it's fair to say at level 2 and below, and therefore, is going to be a particular interest of yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Level 2 and below is of particular interest, and even people at entry level. However, HOLEX is a broad church, and we do far more at level 3 and 4 that I probably knew when I took the job on. And the other thing that we do is that we fill gaps. So in some areas of the country, they provide the 16 to 19 education because that's what's needed. So, if there's a gap there, they're likely to fill it and to be the first to fill it, and they want to be agile. And that's why some of the things in the white paper might help that, like simplification of funding, which I'm hoping won't be just simplification of funding of level 3 and above. It'll be the whole adult funding system. But other things, I think, may end up with more barriers for progression than actually creating a really good pipeline.
Absolutely. So we've heard from Sally, who representing as the Association of Colleges President, that's part of the sector. We've heard from Sue, more around the adult education provider part of the sector, local authorities and alike. We're now going to hear from Simon Ashworth, primarily representing the independent training provider sector. Simon, some opening remarks from you, if that's okay, and welcome.
Hi, Nick, and hi, everyone, and thanks for the invite. I mean, we're certainly very upbeat about the white paper. I think certainly having the employers at the heart is key. It's interesting, isn't it, how we've moved away from employers in the driving seats, recognising the role of the range of stakeholders to support employers. I think one of the positives of the white paper is very much recognising the role of independent training providers. We got a whole section. I think that was a real positive step change. I think there's a chance now, though, that independent providers become a bit stereotyped as just delivering apprenticeships. When they deliver a range of programs, they deliver the majority of traineeships, they deliver a significant number of study programs, ESFs, etc. So I think it's great that ITPs got recognised, but I think there's more to do on that one. As I said, we think the white paper's certainly a bold statement. I think there's some real headline positive holistic commitments. And the devil is always in the detail. You look at things like apprenticeships. Who would argue with increasing the numbers, driving up the quality, getting employers to spend more. But the devil's in the detail about how that's going to operate. I guess in terms of chapter 3, the lifelong loan entitlement is probably one area that could be the most revolutionary part of the white paper. It is very bold, it's very ambitious. There's a huge challenge around level 4 and level 5, the missing middle as it's recognised. Although, what are challenges for independent providers and colleges around regulation and how that's going to work? So potentially it could be a real game changer. But I can't finish without amplifying what others have said around, probably the disappointing bit of the white paper was lack of level 2 and below. It's not just level 2, there's a range of provision, really critical. Graham's already articulated the numbers around the adults in the workforce and the economy that need to be able to get on to the bottom of the ladder to get up to, the level 3 adult offer, and then to look for the opportunities at level 4 and 5, what the LLE will hopefully offer them.
Thank you, Simon. That's useful introduction. Sally, if I may just start with you, and we'll focus, as does this chapter, we'll focus on the higher level qualifications. I noticed from your college's website, the Activate Learning website, that you do foundation degree across your 5 or 6 different colleges. You do foundation degrees, PGCEs. We do BA and BSc top-up programs awarded by partner universities, including Oxford Brookes, University of Reading, University of Greenwich, Kingston University. You offer HNCs and HNDs in partnership with Pearson. So you're obviously quite active already in this space, but how challenging is it at the moment, having to rely or having to work with partners? And do you think that Activate Learning would be a big player in a market perhaps described in the white paper where the further education sector can really flourish at those higher levels?
I mean, for me, partly because I've been around for so long, I find it an irony because FE was where you did 4 and 5. So when I came into FE, we all did level 3, 4 and 5. And it was actually the government that killed it off when they introduced foundation degrees. So I think it is the home of further education. And if I was the Secretary of State, God help you all, I would ensure that level 3, 4 and 5 was the core, was what FE was known for, and entry level 1 and 2 was a really important feeder into level 3, 4 and 5. And then if you wanted to do degree work and research, that was the home of universities. And in a way, in the same way as we work with universities that allow us or don't to do degrees, we will allow universities or not to do level 4 or 5. It's not their right. And the reason why I say that is, having worked with many universities, some of whom have been fantastic, it is still there. They are the big player and they can determine what happens. If level 4 and 5 became colleges, it begins to equalise that relationship, and they can't just ignore you and just do it themselves. So I would change the power relationship if I was the Secretary of State to make colleges and universities more equal. And I'd also look at a different way of certificating level 4 and 5, and whether that was a regional group of colleges that had to work together, I don't know, but it worries me about who is going to be certificating. Is it going to be Pearson's? Is it going to be the current awarding bodies? Are universities going to be able to do it themselves? And I think some universities are struggling, so to move down into our marketplace becomes more important. And I think high quality provision, if you want to achieve it, should be segmented. And as I say, 3, 4 and 5 I would put together. 6 and above I would give to universities, because relationships, in my experience, and I'll give one very bitter relationship with De Montfort University, and I'll accept it was about 8 years ago. We did degrees in creative industries, and it was literally Christmas Eve. Somebody phoned me to say, we're really sorry, but we cannot allow you to do degrees anymore. We're pulling them. We had 60 students we had accepted, and UCAS had closed. So 60 students had to suddenly try and find somewhere. And I'm sorry, I can never forgive. I wrote to everybody and rubbished the poor university at the time. But that is what universities do, and you're a pimple on their side. Yeah. What was 60 students? To be fair to De Montfort, it was nothing. So I just think we've got to be very careful in that relationship. We have an exceptionally good relationship, to be fair, with Brooks, and they've been very good to us, but they have been very good to us. You know, it is not equal. And no, if they want something, we've lost it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I worked for 7-8 years at Lewisham College, and we had what were referred to then, I don't know if you still call them franchise-in arrangements. And we had various arrangements with some of the local universities, including Greenwich. And yeah, I think the power relationship was all about us doing what we're told, exactly. and be grateful for that. Sue, I wonder if I can talk to you about a bit about this power relationship between FE and HE in terms of your time at the department. And the extent to which we've ended up where we have, perhaps at level 4 and 5, as described by Sally, really kind of almost leaving that space to some extent, in part because of the mismatch of power within the department. It's something that previous skills ministers like Anne Milton have very much talked about, that there's lots of media and letters when it comes to school and HE, but there's very little kind of lobbying and so on beyond the usual suspects in FE, and it becomes that kind of, I hate the term Cinderella sector, but you'll have heard that a lot. What was it like within the department, and do you think it's changing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. What is it like within the department? It's still very silo-like, and I think it is. It was there. It was like that when I was there, and I like it. I think it's like it now. The other thing that universities are very good at is finding a gap and moving into it and not asking. I don't think they ever asked permission to set up as many foundation degrees as they did, or what do they call it now, year zeros. So if you don't get your A levels, you can turn up, get a grant, but more importantly, get a maintenance award, a maintenance grant. And that is what attracts people in. And I can't remember any consultation or that, it just sort of happened. And therefore they moved into a gap, which then limits what FE could do, because FE couldn't offer maintenance awards. And it is a big difference. If you're a 20-year-old now, and on one hand you can go somewhere and do year zero and having a maintenance loan and your fees paid, or go to an FE college and may or may not be able to carry on getting your universal credit, but there's a load of questions over that. Which are the one you're going to choose? You're going to choose the one that gives you a guarantee of a course. Yes, it's a loan, and you're going to draw down a loan for maintenance. You're sorted. And that's one of the issues I think that we've still got. And whether anybody thought that was high policy and sorted it, I don't think so. And we've been knocking on the door ever since, saying, well, even when I was in the department, I remember trying to get maintenance grants or maintenance loans for Institutes of Technology students. And actually, I think there was in the consultation in 2012-13 on Institutes of Technology, it does say in that we will pilot maintenance loans, and it never did. So I think it's more not high policy, Nick. I think it's more that universities are very good at marching in, and they're very good then when they're in to take ownership and make it like a closed shop.
Do you think? I mean, your reading of the current administration, how much more serious are they? I mean, in my opinion, if they were deadly serious, you wouldn't have two ministers, one for FE and one for HE, fighting over a limited budget. If they were serious that adult education was to be aligned, then you would have one funding agency, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Absolutely, Nick. And the other thing that's really interesting is that was it last September, I think there was more young people went to university than ever before, even though all the rhetoric leading up to last September and before COVID was we want less people at university and more on apprenticeships. You know, we want less non-economical valuable degrees, but they haven't cut the offer of the degree offer, and they've allowed more people to go on than ever by sort of lifting the cap, officially or unofficially. I never can remember which one it is these days. However, we got more people in university and we got more on offer. And if you take just, you know, everybody likes to have their favourite course that is blind, isn't it? So let's take the gaming industry, yeah, which I used to think was all about gambling, but it's, you know, it's the gaming technology industry. You know, a few years ago, oh my God, people are offering, you know, one university in particular is offering a degree in gaming. Now, nearly every university is offering it. Have we got jobs for all of them? Some people tell me yes, some people tell me no. I actually quite like it. You know, it motivates lots of, you know, lots of youngsters to think that they can go to university. And what's interesting, if you reverse that, then what we've got in FE is a budget being held nationally and is distributed out as they feel right by the department. And our was it 400 level 3 courses on a list decided centrally. So it's not the same response to both sectors. And again, I mean, the university sector has just won out again. And then again, I'm not anti people going to university if that's the right place for them. You know, what I'd like to think is like everybody gets to the right place at the right time with the right financial incentives. That's what I'm after.
Yeah, definitely. Picking up your last point, it definitely feels like there doesn't feel to be like there's much a move away from the government saying, essentially thinking, well, universities, we trust them, they can award their own qualifications, they can decide which courses they run and how they run them. Whereas on the FE side, and we'll talk now to Simon, particularly in the independent sector market, you know, we need to tell them what, where, when, how much, you know, the regulations, the audit, the assurance. It's obviously it's public money, but it's public money in the higher education space as well. So where's the trust and the equitability there? Simon, what are your thoughts there? Because this is potentially a huge opportunity for the sort of fleet of foot part of the independent sector. Already many of them have entered the higher level apprenticeship space, doing degrees in all sorts of subjects. Some in very, very large numbers. Eye-watering numbers, arguably. So we're interested to see how that plays out when they get a visit from Ofsted. What are your thoughts around this kind of QCF at levels 4 and 5, as it were, and the opportunities there?
Well, you know, going back to your point, Nick, I think over 50% of degree or degree level apprenticeships are delivered by non-HEI. So it does show you that you know, there's a range of providers. I mean, I think with the learning entitlement, you know, I think we need to have as many provider types involved in that as possible. I mean, certainly independent providers, you know, they deliver level 4, level 5 apprenticeships, they deliver level 6. So, you know, they've got a lot of the curriculum, the expertise. You know, I just worry about the regulation. You know, you talk there about sort of franchise arrangements that universities have with FE colleges. You know, whereas some of those are extremely costly and prohibitive. So in terms of sort of the level 4, level 5, I think it's a massive opportunity, but you know, we've been keen to stress to the DFE that it needs to have some flexibility in terms of the regulatory side to ensure that all providers can have an offer there to ensure, you know, the breadth of opportunity for learners across a wide range of subjects. So for us, that kind of regulatory question mark around level 4 and 5 is probably the key thing that we're looking to see more about in the consultation that's that's coming quite soon. So I wouldn't necessarily, say there's a role, at certain levels. I think certainly at levels 4 and 5, where you start to go from FE to HE, I think I think we should have an open system that allows a full range of providers who can bring different facets to the offer and give learners more choice. That's what we want. You touched before about individual learning accounts. I think individual learning accounts in this space, along with some form of skills passports, it would be a perfect sort of starting point for that. Give learners the choice of where they study and the portability of the qualification between institutions. So again, the opportunity is massive. It's just will the regulation get in the way of opening up the market for the best for the learners?
What's quite interesting about this level 4 and 5 space, which arguably is kind of year 1 and 2 of a 3-year degree. What's quite interesting is, as I said and Sue repeated, is that we already have advanced learner loans in FE. We already have degree loans and so on in the HE sector. To me, this looks like a kind of a repackaging, but it's still loans. Do you think the government need to put grant money behind some of this in certain areas? I mean, the point about opening it up for learner choice is usually with public sector is there's not enough money to go around for everything the learners want. So that's when the government have to play their part in prioritizing who gets what, and it tends to go to the younger age group, and it tends to go to the sectors of the economy that the government see as in future the most important. But when it comes to loans, assuming that people can pay it, but the government think enough will be able to pay it back, they can be a bit freer with the volumes and the amounts involved. It's very different than kind of levels 3, 2 and below. What are your thoughts, Simon, around how do your members, how have they how has it gone for them with advanced learner loans, and more generally the way that a loans funded education system operates?
It's a really key point, isn't it? The National Skills Fund, we've seen some grant funding for the level 3 adult offer, but it's it's only a 5-year package, which we start to get into 2025, and this landscape around loans, and it's a direction of travel to move more from grant to loan funded provision. I definitely think that there's some priority sectors that loans could get written off once the learner kind of completes those to incentivize them. So I do worry a little bit around the direction of travel around adult education, that we've had a great shot in the arm around the National Skills Fund, but are we moving more to grants? If you look at advanced learner loans, I mean, Graham touched on this before, the majority is still at level 3, very little uptake at levels 4 and 5. And you're also competing with apprenticeships where it's funded by the state or funded by the employer. So again, you talk about sort of coherence and different behaviours from employers and individuals. But I guess our members are a little bit wary about, are we going to end up with a loans-dominated marketplace instead of grant funding, come 2025 and the future beyond that?
Similar question for you, Sally. In terms of, it was 2013 or so when Sue Pember introduced loans with Vince Cable at the department, take you back a few years. And this was a move a lot of money out of grant funding, as well as cut a fair amount of it into a loans-based system using the same student loans company kind of payback facilities and requirements, but in further education at levels, mainly, as you say, Simon, levels 3. So that was a switch you had to make, and you had to explain to your learners, I think, Sally, many of them, that the good news is you don't pay anything now. The bad news is you'll pay more later. How has it gone for you the last sort of 7 or 8 years? And is the loan, your thoughts on that way of funding education at levels 4 and above?
I mean, ideally, you wouldn't fund it like that, particularly when you want adults to switch for jobs that are going to put them on the unemployment register and therefore taking money out of the state. Can you really expect them to upskill themselves, not have a maintenance grant and have a massive loan? Often in jobs, I mean, if I look at my own daughter and what she's now earning, and I look at some of our levels 3 students and what they're earning, it's not comparable, and in a way it's unfair. However, the big issue for me on advanced learner loans is the time it takes before they're signed off. So if you start as a university student, because it all starts in September and it all works smoothly through, you know probably by about October when you start, within few weeks you get your loan. We've had hundreds of situations over the last 5 years where students in good faith start believing they'll get a loan. It takes forever. They're now well into their course. They've done at least half a term. It's now October, November, and they haven't got a loan, and neither do they have the wherewithal to pay for it. So what do you now do? Do you now say, well, I'm sorry you've done this AAT course, but can you piss off because you can't pay for it? So you end up by having a certain number of students, which is probably not what the government would want to hear, but you have to do it by volume of kids in a classroom or adults in a classroom to overcome those. So I think the government hasn't thought through, because if it's high quality, flexible, modular provision, sounds wonderful. That's virtually roll on, roll off. The loans company can't cope with the volume of our students when they start in September. I think it's going to be a complete pig's breakfast. And it's you as the establishment that's left either asking students to leave halfway through a year they've put all that effort into, or they drop out themselves because they're so worried. So I think there's huge issues. I think, what are we going to do with the vast number of people who are now furloughed and unemployed, who are, we'll say, 36 and haven't been in education for 20 years? Their brains will be soggy. And to say to them, there's this great online learning program. You can switch from working in the hospitality industry to working in the care industry, just do a bit of biology. It's not going to happen. So again, it's going to cost us a fortune to keep those people unemployed, and nobody ever sits down in governments, and certainly having work shadowed people in the department, and once making the fatal mistake with DWP, DFE, going, oh, if you two worked together and pooled your money, the Treasury loved me and asked me to go back. The person I was work shadowing in DFE told me to shut up and never do that again. I do think there are ways that we could actually also fund some of this and actually give maintenance grants by looking at other departments and saying, if you lower the people who are unemployed, that it doesn't save the government money, but it doesn't actually cost you anything. You just shift it. But of course, departments, I love it when they say, all of you work together. The ecosystem needs high collaboration. When I went to the department, I said, I'm going to mirror myself on your behaviour. When you as departments work together, come back and give me a ring and I'll work very nicely with everybody.
I mean, that's human behaviour in a nutshell, isn't it? I mean, departments compete with each other over limited resources. Colleges, Sally, compete with each other over limited courses. And just to put you on the spot, Association of Colleges have really been bigging up collaboration. You're all going to collaborate. You're all happy clappy going to work together. It's all going to be la-di-da. And you know, there'll be no need for intervention because you'll all be agreeing with each other. I mean, the world's a bit more complicated than that. Humans are a bit more complicated than that, aren't they?
I mean, humans are very much more complicated, and you've got to have a win-win situation. The problem, so I go back to universities. I do work with universities and I do collaborate with universities, but what I do know is where it's a win-win and both of you gain from it, people are less likely to screw one another. If you're in a collaboration as a university and you've lost half your nurses and the local college is doing it, you just take it off them. If that college was giving you something more, so by actually taking it off the college, it was either going to now cost you more money or cause you problems elsewhere, you'd think about it. Colleges are never incentivised. I remember when we had centres of excellence. To be honest, all the colleges worked beautifully together on their piece, and as soon as the money went, they just carried on. We don't actually encourage collaboration where you truly collaborate, and if I pull out, I materially lose something. And if one of my friend, so let's take the business centres.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't allow any college to have a business centre, but I would allow a group of colleges, and they would have to set themselves up to have that, so that it was for the good of the communities and the good of the individuals. We don't set things up so it's a win-win. We set things up to pretend we're collaborating. And
we have seen a bit of that. I think the government have tried to if we're being blunt, it's bribery, but we'll call it incentivize collaboration through things like IoTs, where they mandate that you have to have certain, they've done it with employers. You've got to have at least 10 in a Trailblazer group to get access to kind of influence the qualifications that your money can then be spent on. So, but I can see that if we had an unlimited pot of money, then you could bribe a lot of people to do a lot of things that you wanted them to do. I guess that's a bit of a challenge. Let's just move the topic on a little bit now, away from the kind of qualifications and higher education, and let's talk a little bit about careers advice, and that natty subject, which was, as I say, seems to have felt a bit crowbarred into this particular chapter, but does warrant a conversation. Let's start with you, Simon, if that's okay, because you guys have been lobbying very hard for schools to really up their game in terms of opening the eyes of their pupils, of all the education opportunities out there beyond the school that they attend. The Baker Clause, many people watching will be familiar with, introduced 3 or 4 years ago. We've got a CEC, a company, I forget what it's called now, whatever it's called. Yeah, how's it going on the ground, Simon? Are things improving, and what do you think of the alignment plans?
I think the whole section around careers advice in the white paper was a breath of fresh air. Last year we said that the Baker Clause needed some bite and enforcement, and we said it should be a limiting grade to schools. So it was really positive to hear that there's a balance here between a carrot and a stick, and I think there's been plenty of carrots and not enough sticks for compliance with that. So that was a very welcome addition. I think increasing careers advice to year 7s, I think that was a positive thing as well, about getting to young people to explain the opportunities, academic and vocational. And then the alignment of the Careers Enterprise Company and the National Career Service, alignment can mean a lot of things, couldn't it, in terms of just working more closely or coming together in a more formal way. The Career Service that we have at the moment is very fragmented and piecemeal. There's some really good schemes out there, like the Ask programme and others. So I think the white paper recognises, it was good that we want to have a comprehensive system, and the white paper recognises that it's piecemeal and fragmented and wants to drive some of that together. So it's a journey, I think. I think it builds on some foundations, some positive, warm words. Obviously, the devil's in the detail, but we were, again, another area we were very pleased to read in the white paper around the ambition around careers advice, the Baker Clause, getting more impartial advice to young people. So yeah, that was definitely a positive chapter for us.
Because this is clearly something that the government realised, that their T-levels aren't going to work if students aren't being encouraged to do them. Parents need to be influenced, teachers need to be influenced, as well as the pupils. Sue, if we can come to you, because careers advice, I presume, fell under your remit to some extent. It seems to bounce around depending on which junior minister they have. It's never really felt like it's had a proper home for me for a long period of time in the department. And whilst a lot of money was spent setting up and then funding the CEC, there hasn't been that much love for it. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's one of these things that, if you went back in history, do you remember when the Department for Education was actually part of the Department for Employment? So it was employment and education. And at that point, the career service was sort of a hybrid. It worked with the equivalent of the old job centres, and it tried to work with young people, and it had sort of always had targets about getting people into different types of jobs. But I think we try to use our career service and or the words career service in too many different concepts. So first of all, we got advice for young people in schools, so that they need to know about apprenticeships. And then we've got, you know, the career type of advice you want mid-career and later on in life when you want to reskill. And we're trying to cover it all in the same conversations. And I think that's why it doesn't hit the mark. Because if you want a careers conversation, as Simon just did, which was about, you know, we must tell school children that they can do an apprenticeship. You know, there's other ways of getting on in life than going through a degree route. That's one thing. And we need a lot of implementation strategies about that. But if your other advice is for the older person about, you know, doing the right degree, you know, whose judgment is the right degree, but saying there are right degrees. You know, if you do the right degree, you will earn this, but if you do the wrong degree, you will only earn that. Well, then it needs a different set of interventions for that at being timely. But at the moment, and from my point for adults, I want the career services to be, and I say services because they are fragmented. The National Career Service, it works on a tender process. So you've got different things around the country and there's a bit of a postcode lottery what you get. But for the adults I'm interested in, you know, those 17 million that haven't got level 2, I'm interested in somebody telling them what they can do in education for free. So I want to see some national advertising. So when we talk about careers, I think we should really be really clear which bit we're talking about. What are the implementation strategies for each of those bits? And then put in place the right organisations to deliver it. But saying that, I'm quite fond of the National Career Service, and in places it works well, and in some places they do that type of advertising to the low level, but it is very haphazard, and it's very, like I said, a bit of a postcode lottery what you're going to get.
Yeah.
So
okay, so let's kind of move that on a bit with Sally and say, okay, Sally, so let's suppose you are the Secretary of State, right? And let's say that Susan Pember is still at the department, and let's say that she's negotiated really well with the Treasury, and she's managed to get hold of some underspend from somewhere or other, and it's £100 million, which is not an insignificant amount of money, but it is a 1 year £100 million. So you're the Secretary of State, you think, and Susan's saying we've got to spend this fast if we're not going to, you know, have every week moaning that we haven't spent the money. So, but Sue says, but the string that comes with this, the string attached to this, is that we can only spend the 100 million on one of three things. Do we spend the 100 million on more careers advisors for a year? Do we spend the 100 million on the National Career Service website and all the funky AI stuff that works out for you what job you might want, which tends to be gardening in my experience, because I just say I like being outdoors for some reason. Or do you spend the 100 million on a marketing campaign to tell people about all the fabulous courses that local authorities and colleges and ITPs offer in their communities? You got 100 million. How do you spend it wisely?
Well, the first question I would ask is, what am I trying to achieve? Because if I've got the National Career Service and it's got good computerized systems that show me pathways, and what I'm trying to do is get more people, whether it's young people or adults, into another market, I wouldn't spend it there. If the problem I'm trying to resolve is that not enough young people are going into apprenticeships, then I would set up career coaches that would be not attached to a school. And the reason why I say that is we treat careers as though it's an intellectual exercise. I'm unemployed and you tell me I need £1 million, here's this £1 million job. Having been a head of careers, we taught careers, we did loads on careers, and lo and behold, most of our young people stayed in the sixth form. And in fact, a colleague of mine in a local school was told, and this is back in the early 80s, if another of their fifth years left to go to the local college, they were closing the careers department. So the influence you have as a teacher is I can tell you everything, and then at the end of it I go, but Simon, economics was my subject. If you come and do economics A level with me, the sky's the limit. So For adults and young people who are particularly from deprived backgrounds, it's the emotions that will stop them, not the information out there. So how do you change the fact that I believe I'm stupid and therefore there is no point going for that job? I'm not humiliating. If I look at myself, I started my life in a remedial stream and told I was stupid. I would have done anything not to be stupid. So you could have told me about a career pathway, wouldn't have touched it. It was individuals that made me believe I was special, that made me do something. That's what you need, and it's expensive.
Absolutely. Listen, thank you. I'm conscious of time, and I'm aware as well that a number of people watching and you may well be looking to observe the National Day of Reflection at midday, which is the 1 minute silence. So I think we should probably draw a line under the webcast at this point, and I would like to thank Dr. Susan Pember, Simon Ashworth and Sally Dicketts for their time. I hope that was a useful and interesting hour and a half of your day. Please do share the recording with anyone that you think may benefit. I'm particularly keen that those on the boards of colleges and training providers and others are engaging. We'll be covering governance next week with chapter 4, and I do think these hopefully these sessions are quite useful for those of you out there that just say, God, isn't FE complicated? Hopefully this is quite a kind of a not too complex way of kind of dipping your toe in the water and just listening to us gas bag for 40 minutes, if nothing else, hopefully past the day in a way that's useful. So on that note, thank you to everyone, and I wish you a great day. Bye from us.
Bye bye everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.